सेव किया था ना?
मैं सिर्फ इसलिए गया था क्योंकि उसने मुझे कॉल किया, that's it. But listen तो.
Save it for someone else.
जिंदगी में सेव करना जरूरी है, मगर जब बात पैसों की हो, सिर्फ सेविंग से काम नहीं चलेगा। इक्विटी म्यूचुअल फंड्स में इन्वेस्ट कीजिए और अपने सेविंग्स को आगे बढ़ने का मौका दीजिए।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
Before we begin, I'd like to make an appeal to you. For those who haven't already, I request you to take membership of the Print's YouTube channel, which costs only 159 rupees per month. Click on the join button to enjoy exclusive member benefits, including loyalty badges, priority responses, and member-only videos. We are now also extending newsletters for all our YouTube members. For this, I request all YouTube members to write to us with their full name and email address at members@theprint.in. That's members@theprint.in, and we'll get back to you. The pilgrim's enchanted eye gazed out at the sheets of blue ice of the Lake of the Peacock Spots, so Dom Dong Ma, illuminated by the light shining off the 5 great peaks of Kanchenjunga. Then a grey shroud began to form. Look at the sky, the pilgrim's guide warned. Those will shortly fall in heavy snow from which no human means can enable us to escape. Why proceed up further? The guide remonstrated. Death awaits us in this desolate place. 1 more hour and we shall be gone. Less than a month later, in December 1878, the great scholar, adventurer and imperial spy, Sarat Chandra Das, clawed his way past the Western Flying Medicine Monastery through the forbidden frontier of Tibet. The saffron-robed Bengali scholar's incredible journey, among the greatest feats in the history of spycraft, would lay the foundations for the war China and India fought 60 years ago this very week. The expedition would set off a bloody struggle to draw borders through the inner Himalaya between 2 great empires, the King and the British. Facing out across the line of control, the armies of the People's Republic of China and of independent India are inheritors of a struggle manufactured by greed, geopolitics, and imperial map-making a century ago. A team of horses cannot overtake a word that has left the mouth, notes the 16th century fantasy novel Journey to the West, which tells of a Chinese monk's travels to India to collect the great Buddhist sutras. The Emperor Qianlong, 5th of the Qing dynasty, later had a special edition commissioned to illustrate the strange worlds of which the novel told. The map showed a land called Hindustan, somewhere south of the Kunlun Mountains. Like words, maps acquire a life of their own. There was a line somewhere in the Himalaya, but no one knew just where it ran. East India Company officials, pushed by Governor General Warren Hastings, had begun to explore trading with Tibet in the 18th century. England had seen a surge in demand for commodities made in China, historian Vibha Arora has shown, but the restrictive trade practices of the Qing Empire had made meeting that demand very difficult. Tibet seemed like a possible alternative route. Traders and mendicants as well as bandits had long profited from the great chains of trade linking the plains of India with Lhasa in Tibet, and the East India Company wanted in. Although he was not allowed to enter Lhasa, the young military officer George Bogle succeeded in establishing diplomatic relations through a mission in 1774. In 1783, another East India Company official arrived, historian Luciano Petech records, bearing gifts from the Bada Saab, fine earrings of coral, a clepsydra functioning with particles of gems, by which he probably means a mechanical watch, spectacles, 2 pieces of special Russian cloth, silver cups full of nutmegs and cloves. Little was done, though, to develop these early diplomatic contacts. Imperial Britain had little influence on the lives of Himalayan people. Mishmi, Mishing, Pasi, Abor, with loose ties to rulers in Gangtok and Lhasa. Through the course of 14 centuries, Tashi Sering has written, Lhasa in turn had a very complex relationship with imperial courts in Beijing and Central Asia, ranging from independence to outright vassalage. From the chronicle thus kept, it is clear that Chinese head constable in Shigatse had little authority by the time the Bengali spy got there. The local economy was clearly disintegrating, with the authorities seeking to pass off debased coin as genuine silver. Feudal authority was exercised savagely. Local criminals, their eyes gouged out, wandered the streets in chains, begging for food. Late in 1881, Das returned to Tibet along with the imperial official Coleman Macaulay. The exposure of his role as a spy would have hideous consequences, Lawrence Waddell recorded in 1905. Tibetans who had helped Das on his earlier mission were imprisoned for life. Their servants were barbarously mutilated, I quote, their hands and feet cut off and their eyes gouged out. For this small price, though, Britain had learned what it needed to know. The power of the king and their allies in Tibet was an illusion. There is a great coming forward of robbers quarreling and fighting, warned the Tibetan religious almanac for the year of the wood dragon, which began in February 1904. Grim omens were seen, like drops of water falling from a brass dragon head in the Jokhang temple in Lhasa, even though it had not rained. An oracle foretold war. Led by the legendary adventurer Francis Younghusband, Imperial British troops soon captured the city. Tibetan soldiers armed with magical amulets to ward off bullets were slaughtered. Following a treaty with the Dalai Lama, Britain won the right to maintain a military presence in Lhasa-controlled territory and to build a network of rest houses, trading posts, and even a telegraph. The cannon had leveled the fortress, guarding against free trade. To imperial administrators in Kolkata, then Calcutta, the prize didn't seem worth winning though. Tibet's primitive economy did not justify the costs needed to control the region, and fears of a geopolitical threat from Russia seemed laughable after the Tsar's army were crushed by Japan that very year. So in 1906, Imperial Britain signed a treaty recognizing Beijing's suzerainty over Tibet. From the summer of 1910, Chinese power began to reassert itself. Following threats of rebellion in Tibet's Kham region, the king ordered its troops to capture Lhasa. Troops of the king army occupied the town of Rima and ordered villagers to build a broad new road to the plains of Assam. Broad enough, historian Berenice Guyot-Rechard notes, for 2 horsemen to ride abreast. And troops were seen in the forests of Kongpo, north of the Siang River. Early in 1911, the colonial officer Noel Williamson and tea garden doctor John Gregerson were sent to investigate these Chinese intrusions. They found Chinese flags deep inside what is now Walong in Arunachal Pradesh and were determined to push further into the Siang Valley. Assam authorities sought vengeance and a successive of punitive expeditions followed. The Qing dynasty itself began to crumble in 1911 though, putting an end to Chinese ambitions. The big question though remained unresolved. Where exactly in the Himalaya did India end and China begin? Even when India became independent in 1947, there was no entirely clear answer to this question. The first official map issued by the country showed only a wash of color where Ladakh and Himachal Pradesh are today, with the words border undefined. Large parts of the border with Tibet in the east, the map noted, were also undemarcated. Even though the map asserted sovereignty over areas like Walong, there had been no colonial administrators present there for decades, not for that matter any Tibetan authority. Following the conflict in 1911, Lhasa, Beijing and New Delhi negotiated what's called the Shimla Agreement, aimed at finally sorting out the border between Tibet and New Delhi. But China walked out of the negotiations. The Dalai Lama agreed to significant concessions, seeing Britain as a guarantor of Tibet's independence. Late in the summer of 1914, the colonial officer Henry McMahon drew a line through the darkness of the inner Himalaya, much of it unknown to contemporary cartography and geographers. The line ran some 1400 kilometers from Burma to Bhutan. The new border was one of imagination, with neither side exercising any real sovereignty. And following the outbreak of the Second World War, It was simply forgotten. China, after all, was a wartime ally of Britain and the United States against Japan. Late in 1950, the PLA marched into Lhasa, and India's world changed. The map issued in 1950 was withdrawn 4 years later and replaced with one that asserts modern India's position. Even before the invasion of Tibet, there were signs that Beijing wasn't content with the borders as India understood them. And within weeks of Prime Minister Chu Enlai's 1954 visit to India, where he made no suggestion that China disputed India's understanding of the border, Beijing protested the presence of Indian army soldiers on the Barahoti Pass. From 1955 on, there were a succession of military intrusions, but in each case, China insisted the PLA was on its own territory. Then, in 1958, Beijing's official China pictorial map asserted claims over the whole of what was then India's Northeast Frontier Agency, with the exception of Tirap, as well as parts of Ladakh, Uttar Pradesh and Himachal Pradesh. Chu Enlai responded to Indian protests by repeating that the maps were based on old Kuomintang cartography, that is, of the government that was in power before the revolution in China. But he added that China hadn't surveyed its borders, nor consulted with other countries on the issue. Prime Minister Nehru finally shot down Chinese proposals for a joint border survey. There can be no question about these large parts of India being anything but India, he wrote on the 14th of December 1958. I do not know what kind of surveys can affect these well-known and fixed boundaries. Even today, both countries are making the same argument and backing it up with armies faced off on the roof of the world. I'm Praveen Swami and I'm National Security Editor of ThePrint. Thank you for listening to Security Code.